Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Wander with Andrew Wilcox. I'm your host. Name is in the title. Anyway, thanks for joining me. I'm so excited about this episode. I was so nervous about doing it. This guy is another podcast host, which is probably what made me more nervous than his incredible education, because I wanted to make sure I was a good interviewer to him. I hope I did a good job. Think I did okay. But anyway, Michael Inzlicht. He is a professor of psychology at the University of Toronto. He is a very funny guy, a very interesting man, and he has his own podcast. He hosts a podcast called Two Psychologists, Four Beers, with another co-host, and it's really funny. It's really interesting. So if you like this one, I highly recommend that you listen to that one. Today's episode, all about self-control. And I think I'm going to give this episode probably the longest title I've used so far. And it's going to be called, All in All, We're All Our Lack of Self-Control. I think. We'll see. We'll see what I actually write on the internet to compel people who don't know me to listen to this episode. But it's all about self-control and how tough self-control is and how we can try to use self-regulation to do that. I don't know. You got to listen to the episode. Yeah, self-control is something for me that's always been a thing. But I left the podcast hopeful, even though there's not a definitive solution for creating self-control at this time. Yeah. So here he is, without further ado, Michael Inzlicht.
Welcome to Wander with Andrew Wilcox.
Yes, so I'm a professor of psychology at the University of Toronto. I've been here, this is my 14th year, I believe. So I'm a social psychologist, but also a neuroscientist. So I go by the term social neuroscientist. So I study regular behavior, but I study at the level of behavior, at the level of cognitive processes, and critically, I also study at the level of the human brain. So that'd be kind of my job title, and I mean I can get into more detail if you want, but that's kind of the main job title.
That's long and short of it, yeah. And two of your big areas of study seems to me have been, one of them being self-control and the other being looking at the processes that science uses. Am I right to say that?
Well, I would say, I mean, I think I do have two, I've had two clear areas, and then I maybe supplemented it with maybe like a meta content area, if you will. So my two content areas, as you mentioned, self-control is a big one, especially in the past 10 or so years. The first part of my career, however, I studied prejudice and discrimination, specifically from the perspective of stigmatized people. So what is it like to belong to a group that is stigmatized in the eyes of the broader society, and how might that impact people's, for example, academic performance or academic striving? So those are really the two main things I've been really focusing on. And then the other thing you mentioned is really kind of more of a meta concern, and that is just my concern for meta science. So how, the science of science, and have we as a field, and I'm talking specifically about psychology here, have we as a field made mistakes? And if so, how do we catch these mistakes? And how do we improve upon our mistakes, making sure that we don't make those same mistakes next time? So I'm really, concerned about, the replicability of psychological science. I'm concerned about that.
And just to touch on that for a second, because we're talking about it before we get into the self-control stuff, is that a tough conversation to have when people seem recently to want to question science a lot?
It's a tough question. I mean, it's been an extremely acrimonious time in psychology, and maybe in other areas of academia. So I suspect you see glimpses of this in economics, in cancer biology, in cancer medicine, neuroscience. There's this zeitgeist now where we're kind of like introspecting and examining some of our assumptions, our inferential tools. And you use the word uncomfortable. It is deeply uncomfortable and unsettling, because what it means is that some of the things that I learned myself as an undergraduate, some of the things I learned in textbooks, some of the things that I've taught, we now know are probably wrong. And it's one thing to stay at the level of ideas and say, oh, that idea might not be right, or we got to refine our ideas. But what often ends up happening is that we also, because these are scholars and researchers who derive these ideas, the people who derive these ideas start identifying with the idea. So if you criticize an idea, by extension, you're criticizing a person, another scholar. And, well, as you can imagine, people don't like being criticized. And people take these criticisms very, very personally. Now, science is supposed to be different than other arenas. It's not politics. It's not religion. It's supposed to be kind of a clear-headed, rational pursuit of small t truth. And that requires really digging deep, and really it requires self-criticism, or actually requires scientists to criticize other scientists. But what ends up happening is that scientists get upset about that and they start firing back. So we've been in a period, I would say, of 5 to 7 years of it's slowed down a little bit in terms of the fighting, but there's been intense fighting for, I would say, 4 or 5 years now. That's uncomfortable.
Yeah, and it seems as though then that seeps into the general public, and the general public seems to maybe, in my eyes, kind of lose connection to that it is a tenet of science, is that science is supposed to be replicable, it's supposed to be tested, that's what's supposed to make our ideas stronger. But people seem to, I don't know, our faith in science doesn't seem to be as strong as it should be at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's understandable at some level, but it's also it reflects a surface level understanding of what science is. I think all of us have, it might be a human universal perhaps, that we want, neat, tidy answers to the questions that we ask. We want definite answers, and science can't provide that necessarily. At least, especially if we're dealing with a subject matter that is young, that is not mature. So psychology has been around for 100+ years, not very long. There's still so much more that we need to know, and so of course we're going to make mistakes. Of course we're going to have false starts, but like you said, what differentiates science as a way of knowing from other ways of knowing is that it's self-correcting. Now, it might take decades for a science or an area to self-correct, but it eventually will get to the truth. But it can only get there by self-reflection, by introspection, and by criticism. But what that means is that sometimes we just are like, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. Mm-hmm. This is my best guess right now, and that's the best we can do. And I think for the lay public, you have to be comfortable with that, knowing that the scientific method is actually, the scientific method is terrible. It's so error prone. It's lots of bad things, but you know what? It's better than any other method that we have. So it might not be perfect. It might even be bad, but it's better than any other way of knowing because it's self-correcting. So we have to let science self-correct, and that means sometimes some of the flashy headlines you read in newspaper articles, they might be wrong. So a great example of this, not in psychology, is nutrition. It seems like my entire life I've been given advice about what to eat, what not to eat, and every 10 or 15 years, it seems like the field is radically changing their minds. So when I grew up, it was all about low-fat diets, low-fat this, low-fat that. There'll be low-fat versions or no-fat versions of all different kinds of foods. And now it seems like some nutrition experts are saying, no, we were wrong about the fat part. It's actually sugars that are the evil. Fats are okay. So as a consumer of nutrition science, you're like, I don't know what to do. But, if nutrition scientists are using the proper inferential tools, eventually they're going to figure it out. The problem is, and I don't know nutrition science enough, I suspect the inferential tools they've been abusing it. Yeah. And maybe they need to have their own replication crisis, their own kind of crisis of conscience to understand how to make their science better. And again, I don't want to throw stones because I live in a glass house.
And the sugar and the diet stuff, to me, my question always in those type of ones is, who's funding the study? Where's the money coming from? What's the goal of those studies? And that's my worry, is that there might not be enough transparency in those studies when it when they come out. Like, I don't think people dig deep enough into that to try to understand it.
Yeah, that's an interesting, I guess, element that might be less present in psychology. So I think with something like nutrition science, yeah, there's like huge multi-billion-dollar companies who are in they have huge invested interest in whatever their product is being seen as safe and healthy. So yeah, you're gonna have the food lobby is going to be in a way shaping and pushing the science and suppressing some science. So I think nutrition science in some ways has a tougher job, but there are no doubt lots of nutrition scientists who are not, being paid by big food companies, and they want to get to the bottom and they want to get, ferret out truth. And, those are the people who should be trusting. So, I'm sure there are enough nutrition scientists who don't have a conflict of interest, and that's the science we should be paying attention to. Psychology, I think there's less, vested interest. There's lots of these big corporations who've got to want to sell something. I mean, it's not absent. There are conflicts of interest, but I think it's less present.
Well, speaking of psychology, let's get right down to self-control, because this is what I'm really interested in learning a little bit more about, because I'm a human being that has very little self-control. And I always wonder, too, if people believe they have more self-control than they do. Would you say that's something that's true? I don't know specifically the answer to that question about self-control per se, but it is true that we don't always have a great sense of where we stand in all different kinds of dimensions. So as far back as Freud, probably even further back, we've known that, there's only a small part of our lives that are available to our conscious reflection. And that includes reflecting on our own character traits. So there's no doubt there are going to be some people who think they are really, really good at self-control, but fail miserably when they're put to a test. And conversely, there are going to be some people who are like, no, I'm not really that good at self-control. But yet when they're, when a plate of hot, delicious cookies is put in front of them, they're like, oh, no, I'm okay. I don't need that. I don't need those right now. Or, it was Halloween last night. So as I was trick-or-treating with my kids, I ate so much candy. And some people are totally fine with that. And whether their self-knowledge might not reflect it. Now, it's true that self-knowledge, self-report is fallible, right? So not everyone has, really good a handle on their traits. But it's actually remarkable at how consistent, on average at least, people's own self-reports are of various skills, including self-control, correspond with how other people would judge them. Okay, now that's not true for every single person, but on aggregate, self-report is actually pretty good. And in fact, it's so good, in fact, that some of the best studies, I would argue, that we have about self-control, and by best studies, I mean those studies that tell us, really reveal the power of self-control, are based on people's self-reports. And those studies are take a couple of shapes, but oftentimes it's like you ask people about their levels of self-control, and then you examine various aspects of their lives that reflect healthy or unhealthy functioning. And it turns out that people who report having high self-control end up, for example, having more satisfying relationships, less likely to be divorced, more likely to have a healthy weight, more likely to exercise, less likely to have various kinds of medical conditions, more likely to live longer, less likely to be in prison, more likely to have more money in the bank. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. It's, I've said this a few times, if you've got children, and of course parents always want the best for their children. If you want to, endow them with the best possible life, you could, the two best things you could ask, hope for them is that they're smart, so have high IQ, and that they are conscientious or have high self-control. If they have those two things, I mean, very likely on average, they're going to live quite good lives. So is there a way an individual can improve their self-control?
That is an amazing question, and a really, really important one. And unfortunately, I don't have any good answers. This, in a way, is a holy grail of self-control research. It's how do we know it's important. right? Like so at the trait level. So people who are dispositionally high in self-control, again, they live the good life.
Yeah.
You name it, they have it. So much so that some people have claimed that they don't know of any negative sides to having self-control. I think that's an overstatement. I think there are some negative sides. So I think, for example, people might persevere sometimes when they ought to quit. So, for example, they've got high self-control and they really, really want to be an actor, but they stink. Having good self-control and persisting is not to their benefit. But that's maybe an exception. So given that it leads to the good life, how can we improve it? How can we get people to increase that really, really important quality? And like I said, we don't really have a good answer. Okay, now that doesn't mean people haven't generated answers, but unfortunately, the data have not supported each of these answers. So let me give you a flavor for some of the answers. It's really just one, possibly two, but they're related really. One is the notion that if you practice self-control, you will build up your so-called self-control muscle. Okay, so just like when you work out in a gym and lift weights, you'll build up, let's say, your bicep muscle. And over time, you'll notice your biceps getting larger and you'll be stronger and you'll be able to lift more and more weight successively over time. The idea here is that what if I practice self-control? What if I deny myself the pleasure of chocolate, for a week or 2 weeks or a month? Will I then become better at, not only not eating chocolate, but will I become better at my schoolwork, which also involves, regulating my attention and my time and involves self-control? Well, if I, restrain myself again from eating chocolate, will I be able to quit smoking cigarettes, which I've been having a really hard time with? And that was proposed by Roy Baumeister, a very famous, well-known social psychologist out of Florida State. Actually, sorry, he was at Florida State University. He's now at the University of Queensland in Australia. And him and his students tested these ideas out, and they had some successes. So they had some data suggesting that if you practice self-control for a week or two, you'll show some indices that your self-control is improved. But as more and more studies were run, more data was collected. It turns out that is was probably a false positive. It doesn't seem to be any long-term benefits of practicing self-control, okay, in terms of building the self-control muscle. So if you deny yourself chocolate for a course of 2 weeks, guess what? You haven't eaten chocolate for 2 weeks. And maybe it'll be easier for you to deny yourself chocolate in a week or two following, right? But even that, I'm not, that wasn't actually tested, but I suspect that would be correct. But in terms of it affecting your ability to quit smoking, nothing. Your ability to maintain a good, let's say, homework studying regimen, nothing. So that that seems to have been a bit of a flop, and there's an emerging consensus that practicing self-control probably doesn't increase the so-called self-control muscle. So that's number one. Number two. And this is much more serious, and this is now like a multi-million-dollar industry. There is something called brain training or cognitive training. Yeah. And you might have seen some of these companies. This is a company called Lumosity. Yep. That actually was forced to pay a fine in the 7 digits. I forget now what number was at the beginning of that 7-digit number, but the millions, because they were found guilty of false advertisement. Because essentially they claim to reduce cognitive decline and to increase aspects of control, and they can't show that. But now let me just kind of tell you what brain training is. Brain training is essentially, or cognitive training is essentially, it's typically older adults who maybe want to prevent cognitive decline or improve their ability to control their behaviors. They engage in brain training. So they do these kind of little games on their computer or on their smartphones for like maybe 20 minutes a day for many months even. And the creators of the software claim that it would increase cognitive ability more generally, and maybe would increase specifically as it relates to control is something called inhibitory control. And this is like a fancy cognitive term for self-control, if you will, the ability to restrain dominant impulses. So by practicing little tasks, behavioral tasks, over and over and over again, kind of like that practicing self-control idea, you might be building up this self-control muscle and then get better on it, not just on the task that you practiced on, but in other tasks as well. And again, thousands of people have run through this, and the results are very straightforward. The results are, if you practice these cognitive tasks, you get really good at those cognitive tasks. Okay, so there's one task called the Stroop task. That's a famous task in psychology where you see color words like red, yellow, green, orange, and they're printed or presented in colors that are incongruent with the semantic meaning of the word, or sometimes congruent. And it's tough to say red when it's printed in green. Yeah. And just by a little bit of math, you can figure out people's kind of scores on their ability to restrain their impulses. Well, guess what? You practice the Stroop task for months. You get good at the Stroop task, but no one cares about doing well in the Stroop task. No one, even me. And I give my participants in my lab Stroop tasks all the time. I care about the Stroop task because I think it means something else. It might translate to something else. I hope people who practice the Stroop task for months and months might do better on tests in their school. They might have better memory in their everyday lives. They might be better able to restrain their desire to eat fatty foods. But none of that has been shown. All we know is that they show what's so-called near transfer. They get better at the Stroop task, but they don't show any generalized effect. So essentially, we don't know. We don't know how to improve self-control. Now, I have one idea that I want to share with you, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
This is an idea that's not been tested, so it's just an idea, and I've actually just proposed it to a granting agency here in Canada. Hopefully, they will give me the money to do it.
Yeah.
And the idea here is kind of like a brain training in a way, but it's not a practice-based kind of training. It's more about rewarding certain kinds of things. Okay, so one thing we know from cognitive psychology is that people don't like working. People are inherently lazy. And that's true physically and also mentally. So if I give you an option, I'm going to give you the same reward, and you could either walk 1 meter or walk 1 kilometer to get the same reward. Which would you prefer? Over and over again, people are going to pick the 1 meter over the 1 kilometer. And the same thing with, you have to think about this thing really, really hard for a minute, or think about it, not so hard for about 10 seconds. Which do you prefer? Again, you prefer the easier one. So people are lazy. However, people are willing to exert effort if they are rewarded for it. Mm-hmm. If they know there's a big reward at the end of the day, they're willing to work hard. So what we think we can do is reward people's hard work and get them into a lab and have them voluntarily choose to do something hard and reward them for that. And then what ends up happening is that the feeling of hard work, those phenomenal feeling states, because they're always rewarded or consistently rewarded, they might, to use a technical term here, they might take on a secondary reinforcer status. They might be, inherently rewarding in and of itself. So when I work hard, I expect a reward to come. So just like Pavlov's dogs, when they heard a bell, they salivated. We want to train people such that when they work hard, when they exert themselves, they salivate metaphorically. Mm-hmm. They expect a reward. And we're now testing these ideas out, or we're going to hope to test these ideas out in the next few years. So maybe that is some way by getting people to find by finding effort rewarding, they might be more willing to engage it, including during times when people need to control themselves.
Is there any value in religious practices that try to teach self-control?
That's a really fascinating question. At first I was like, whoa, religion, where's this coming from? But actually there is a lot of really interesting research on this very topic. Now I should kind of maybe frame my answer with an admission. So I'm an atheist. Mm-hmm. And so I grew up Jewish. My parents are still very observant, but I consider myself a Jewish atheist. So culturally Jewish, but don't believe in God. But yet I'm about to heap a lot of praise on religion. Mm-hmm. And that's because it's been shown, at a number of levels now, that religious people tend to engage in behaviors that reflect more self-control. So they're less likely to drink, they're less likely to gamble, they're more likely to be healthy, to live longer lives. And now some of this has to do specifically, there are some religious scriptures that specifically, instruct adherents to do certain things. So, for example, in Islam, you're not supposed to drink. So it would make lots of sense that Muslim people won't be drinking. Premarital sex is generally a no-no in most religions. So you can imagine there'd be less of that. But it turns out that there might be other reasons why, and interesting reasons why religion might increase people's abilities to control themselves. And that is because religions typically have a godlike figure, a supernatural agent who knows all and sees all. Okay? And if you have a supernatural agent that knows all and sees all, that being will know, for example, when you're quote unquote sinning. But sinning could also, it could be something, that's in the Bible or something, but it could also be like, hey, I told myself I'm not going to eat that bad food. And if I do, like, not only do I know it, God knows it too. And God wants me to kind of, be consistent with my goals. So that could be, one way in which God could act as a scaffold to help you monitor your own behaviors. But with the religion, you not only have a supernatural agent, you have a religious community. Other adherents, other co-religionists who you might see once a week or multiple times a week. And they might hold you to some of your goals too. Because in a way, especially if you speak about your goals to other people, they might hold you accountable as well. So yeah, there's a pretty robust link between being religious and having a better self-control. And we're still kind of piecing out how that works, but the connection is robust and it seems to make sense too.
Yeah, and that's to me, like, as you said, I'm also an atheist. I would identify myself as an atheist. I don't have any children, but I always wonder, especially when it comes to children, we use characters like Santa Claus to do the same type of thing. You act better, use self-control. I was horrible. I always snuck in the closet and looked at my gifts before Christmas Day, and we knew where they were. My mom would hang that over our head and say, well, you don't want to upset Santa, but you know where they are. You can look at them. I would look at them. But it's that type of act used to hopefully improve our self-control, which completely failed with me, but worked very well with my sister, who wouldn't go anywhere near it because she has, for years, always had better self-control. She would have Halloween candy for 12 months. I would have it for 12 hours, that type of a thing. And that's why I wonder if those types of things work or if they don't when it comes to instilling any self-control in children, or if we just live in a marshmallow test world where if you would eat the marshmallow, your self-control's out for life.
Yeah. That's a good question. There's a lot in there. I would say, I think religions work to the extent that you believe in the agent, right? Mm-hmm. So if you believe that Santa Claus is actually going to punish you or not, because you're naughty, then I suspect you wouldn't have necessarily checked. So if you truly believe, I suspect you're more likely to adhere to the rules set out by that, the religion, or in this case, some mm-hmm. sort of, tradition of Santa Claus. But there are other things out there that help us, stay controlled. So, for example, we now live in a really secular society, mm-hmm. and civil society has taken over a large part of what religion used to take. So, we don't need God to help us not murder and steal, and because we've got the police, we've got the judicial system, and if you do that, there's a good chance, or at least there's a chance that you'll get caught and might be in prison. So we stay good for those reasons. We don't necessarily need to stay good, for God being there. Mm-hmm. But I'm not sure that works for like maybe the more mundane kinds of self-control things that we're talking about. Where the civil society doesn't care if you skimp on your diet, but perhaps your religious community might, or your to the extent. So, for example, in Judaism, there's strict dietary rules, and I remember as a kid, I wouldn't want to admit to people that I broke those rules, and mm-hmm. because I wouldn't want to admit it, I would abide by the rules, right? So it kind of kept me in check. at least in the regard of these religious rules. And you can say that was a self-control. Like, I mean, bacon. I mean, bacon is friggin' delicious, and I didn't have bacon until I was like, I think 18 or 19.
Wow.
So yeah.
Oh, that's hard for me to believe. I had bacon every day of my life.
I missed out. I'm making up for lost
candy.
time now, though.
That's good. I'm glad to hear it. Would you say then social media, is this a help in any way for self-control? Because now we have large groups and essentially this unfortunate tribalism that's coming together, but we have like you don't get away with anything now. Like, you can't get away with anything. Is this a positive then when it comes to helping with people's self-control, or is it seem like the negative that it seems to be? Is it the negative that it seems to be?
That's a really interesting question. I haven't thought about it in terms of self-control per se, but it seems like, it's become hyper politicized and polarizing, and it certainly seems that people jump on top of you, but it seems like only for certain kinds of excesses, right? So political excesses or perceived excesses, I should say. I'm not sure Twitter is going to jump all over you if you're like, oh, I ate some more poutine. I don't think other people might just applaud that as opposed to denigrate it. But I mean, I think actually social media is. The way I thought about social media in terms of self-control is more as another thing that we need to control.
Yeah.
So, for example, I'm on social media quite a bit, too much, and I now need to engage in control to restrict my social media intake, and I find it incredibly difficult. In fact, it's so difficult that I install these apps on my phone and my computers that lock me out of social media during hours where I want to be getting productive work done. So I would say, if anything, it's a net negative for self-control from my perspective.
Yeah, I just wonder when it comes to, like, speech has been so, like, I don't like it. I find that we've gotten almost a little too intense. But it seems like some people have decided that some things are just no longer part of conversation, and anytime those types of things come into public conversation, they're instantaneously squashed down. And some of those things I do agree with, absolutely. There's certain conversations which I don't think it should be a debate anymore whether something is right or wrong. And some I go, well, no, maybe we do need to have more of a conversation about that. But it seems now that social media has put a lot of people in that position of saying, and they see it as a negative, well, I would say this, but I can't because social media is going to get all over me. Is that a wholly bad thing? Overall, is that a bad thing in all ways, or is there some positive to that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Actually relates to so I've got my own podcast called Two Psychologists, Four Beers, and we discuss all different kinds of things, usually about psychology. And just, I believe it was our last episode that's going to air next week. We talked about this issue of moral outrage. Okay, and it seems like moral outrage is so finely displayed on social media, on Twitter, for example, where you say something. So, for example, let's use an example. So I don't forget how many months ago now, quite a few, maybe over the summer. There was this, someone was, some teenage girl was wearing, I believe, she'd bought this beautiful Chinese dress, and this woman is not Chinese herself, and it was beautiful. It's a beautiful dress, and you can buy in any, a store in Chinatown. Here in Toronto and elsewhere, I'm sure. And most people, saw it as being positive, but all of a sudden, a bunch of people were like, how dare you? This is cultural appropriation. You are white and you cannot wear a Chinese dress. You're not allowed to. This is, and now this is considered a big no-no. And for me, from my political perspective, I'm liberal, but I find that to some extent, the left has gone too far in certain respects. And here's one example: this notion of cultural appropriation. I mean, this is sold by, shops all over China and all over, Chinatowns in North America, for example, openly. And people, Chinese people want white people and non-Chinese people to wear these things. That's why they're selling them. And most Chinese people responded very positively to this woman's dress. But there was a huge backlash. I mean, this went viral. This poor teenage girl's dress, and you look at that, and it's ridiculous. So it's like, okay, this is outrage now. Outrage on full display. Is that a good or a bad thing? I mean, from my perspective, in that example, that's a terrible thing. I personally don't see anything wrong with it, and I think like it's there might be some kernel of truth there. Like, okay, sure, we need to be respectful of all cultures, sure. And let's be careful, because sometimes there is instances where cultures steal from others, and we need to maybe be aware of those kinds of things. But I think cultures are inherently malleable and flexible, and cultures are dynamic and they're always changing. So, and this is an example of maybe Western culture, white culture changing and incorporating all different kinds of elements. And I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing. But now, is outrage always bad? Is it always a bad thing? And I don't think so either. I think, I typically respond to it as a negative, but I think outrage, moral outrage, as expressed outline, it sometimes can lend voice to marginalized voices, to small voices that are stigmatized and marginalized, and it elevates it, and it gives a voice to the voiceless, and sometimes that's a good thing. Right. Sometimes we want the voices to be heard. It raises issues that we want to be aware of. Like, there's not that many people in the world who experience this. Oh, well, isn't that interesting that some people experience this in a different way, and can we accommodate them in any way? The problem is that not all minority voices are worth elevation. Okay. Or not all minority opinions are worth elevation. There's lots of nasty minority voices. So, Nazism. Yeah. White supremacy. I want those voices to be stigmatized and not heard, and outrage can elevate those kinds of voices too. So I think it can be a double-edged sword, but I mostly am annoyed by it, especially online.
Yeah, Twitter to me has become a harder place to stay for a long period of time for me. I find Twitter itself has just been tough to consume for long periods of time. I end up leaving there rather angry than feeling like I learned something. When I originally got on it, I started following, intelligent people in hopes of getting smarter. And then after a while, and the one thing that drives me the most crazy is when somebody says something incredibly unintelligent, and then somebody very intelligent retweets that in order to take them down. But the original tweet had 8 followers, and now all of a sudden that person's opinion is being seen by hundreds of thousands of people. And I'm going, well, there's a reason that person had 8 followers, because clearly their view was a view that shouldn't be shared, and it usually falls somewhere in the white supremacist, ignorant type of a thing. And then just to take them down, you've elevated them all the way up. That's where I love the level playing field that social media has brought in a lot of ways, but that's where the level playing field, I think, is kind of backfired.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. And I think I would be worried if I was the head of Twitter and Facebook, for that matter, because what you just described, this notion of you first got on and you felt good about it, you're learning, and I should say your experience is mirrored by my own. When I first got on, I was learning tons. But now, more or less, I'm like, it's either like stuff I already know, okay, been there, or the stuff that's new is like garbage. Yeah. So I find myself on there less and less, and I think that's a common experience, and I think people are leaving those platforms more and more.
Well, I think it's becoming people are leaving, and who's left there is not the people who you want to be having the conversations with, and a lot of them fighting with those people who you don't want to have conversations with. And so it's been a tougher experience for me for social media, and that's why I worry about these ideas like self-control, where I wonder if we have an inflated idea of our self-control, but we're constantly being bombarded with negative messages, wrong ideas, and they still sort of seep in. They still sort of get into the machine a little too much. That we've re-elevated these crazy ideas because we've created a more level platform for some of these sort of to sit on, and not even necessarily consciously, but subconsciously. Is that a wild idea?
No, I think so. I mean, I don't fully see the connection with self-control here, but I get what you're saying in the sense that right now our informational ecosystem is being populated with voices and opinions that have long been suppressed or never given the light of day because maybe they didn't need to be given the light of day. And now we're seeing more fringe voices being elevated to the mainstream. Now we can't divorce that from what's going on politically in the world. So I think it's not only social media's fault. I think there are political movements, that have happened in the past, few years that have elevated some of those fringe voices that shouldn't have been elevated and normalized them. And that's why you're seeing them out in social media because they're to some way legitimized. But now they're in the ecosystem, and then they start influencing, they start seeping into people's own ideas of what is right and what is wrong, what is moral, what is immoral. And then, people's own moral compass is changed. And maybe that's how it can affect self-control. So, we think of self-control in some ways as one way you can break down self-control is you break it down to three elements. You've got a goal that you need to meet. You need to have a way to monitor the current state of the environment to see if it's aligned with your goals or if it's mismatched with your goals. And if it is mismatched, you then need, let's say, kind of the motor of control that effectuates change. Okay. Now, but the starting point of control is having a goal. Okay. What is your set point? What do you want to do? And I think what could happen with social media is it might change your goals. It might change what you think is acceptable. So maybe you might have had a goal, let's say 4 or 5 years ago of, maybe some sort of egalitarian goal or a goal of promoting diversity or something like this. And now, because of all these kind of fringe voices that are kind of, racist, it seems like to me, maybe you're less likely to have those goals. And I'm just using this as one example. It's the same thing with, here's another example that may be less controversial. Or at least more controversial, I don't know. The sexualization of, sexualized imagery has increased, I believe. As I've gotten older, I see more and more skin and more sexual attitudes are increasingly permissive. And that might be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on your moral frame. But regardless, it affects how people themselves set goals for the kinds of attitudes, behaviors they want to engage in sexually, right? So now the norms have changed, and then people's goals have changed. So just like our political environment can, it can change the norms, and it can change our goals, and then it changes what we decide we want to control and what we decide not to control. So in that way, I see the connection.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I'm trying to say, and maybe self-control isn't the exact engine of that, in that we all believe that we have enough self-control that if all these things are out in the universe, we're going to be able to avoid them. But sometimes I think we may be influenced by the outside sources more than we believe that we are.
Oh, okay. So yeah, they're 100%. The biggest predictor of whether you're going to, we have data on this and other people do as well, not just us. The biggest predictor of whether you are going to meet your own self-set goals is not self-control. That is not the biggest predictor. The biggest predictor is whether you encounter a desire that conflicts with that goal, or in other words, if you encounter a temptation. Okay, so if you encounter a temptation, there's a decent chance that you might, you might succumb to that temptation, and you might actually, engage in behaviors that directly contradict your own goals. So being exposed, if you want to, the best way to control your behaviors is to manufacture or create or environments where you're less likely to encounter temptations. That's the best way to manage your goals, is to kind of, so for example, here's a simple example. Let's say you're trying to manage your food intake. You're trying to go on a diet. You'll do better at meeting your dieting goal if you avoid driving by or walking by on your way home from work the bakery or the poutine shop or whatever it is your food that really gets you. If you avoid those, you're less likely to see them and less likely to want to buy them or not have those foods at home. So to the extent that social media offers things that are tempting, offers things that contravene with your goals, then yeah, it's going to be a net negative for you meeting your goals.
Well, and not even just social media, but it's all media now. We just have more media than ever before. We're in constant exposure to temptation, whether it's diet or sex. Definitely those two more than anything, I think, is the want to consume and purchase and everything. I think we're more exposed to that than ever before.
Yep, that's right. Actually, another one, and this relates to an earlier point, and there's actually empirical research on this. A really big temptation for people is social media itself.
Yeah.
Like people find it incredibly hard to resist the notification on their phone, or their beep that something is going on, and they just can't help but not look at it. And people set goals for themselves not to do those things, and they just can't help it.
I can't.
Yeah.
I have zero resistance to that. If my phone goes off, like it's off right now. Because if I had it on, if I heard it beep, I'd have to know what the notification was, and I also I have no ability to stop myself from looking at what that notification is. I need to know what it is. I have no self-control on that.
Right. So, I mean, one simple fix there is turn off your notifications, period, for all social media. So I don't have notifications on. The only notifications I have on my phone are text messages, typically from my wife, and that's it. Yeah. I don't want to have any other notifications, even though I get lots of messages. I just don't want to have that thing vibrating in my pocket telling me, taking me away from other things. So I think a big source of conflict for people now is, what is vying for their attention. Mm-hmm. People I think feel out of control with their attention. They want to be, especially if your work is even a little bit self-directed, where no one's watching over you as you're doing your work. You're like, the temptations are all right on your desktop. Yeah. And it could be really, really hard to get work done, or people want to read books. People don't read books anymore, and I think part of that is because there's so many other things that they're competing with their time. So attention is we need attention to regulate our attention. Like it's you need control there, and it's very, very hard.
Okay. So then, what would be your one piece of advice you would give to somebody trying to improve their self-control? Create an environment?
Yeah, again, other than I don't know, good luck to you. I think it would be, we might want to think about it a little bit differently. Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is getting a bit jargony here. But in psychology, we have two terms. We have the word self-control, and the way I think of self-control is I think of that as willpower, as kind of this muscular pushing away of thoughts, of emotions, and behaviors. It's kind of like, literally controlling yourself. I see poutine is in front of me. I'm like, I should not eat that food. And you are kind of grabbing your hand away from the poutine. That would be self-control. Now there's another term called self-regulation. Self-regulation is a broader term, essentially referring to any kinds of actions, behaviors, strategies that might help you meet your goals. Okay? The things that go into self-regulation include self-control. Self-control is one self-regulation strategy, but you've got various other ones. So, for example, you've got goal setting. You've got planning. You've got situation selection. Again, managing your situation. What's in your pantry? What's in your fridge? If we're looking at food kinds of goals. You've got what are you paying attention to in your environment? We've got reframing the stimuli that you see in your environment. With lots of different things you can see. So if I had one piece of advice, it would be to think about self-regulation more broadly and to ask yourself what you can do to reduce the number of temptations that you might encounter. So think about your goals, and then think about what are those things that conflict with those goals. What are the things that are taking you away from those goals? You can't think of all of them, but you can think of a few. So if you're a smoker, I know a lot of people have an association with smoking and drinking. Or there's a very specific, place association with smoking too. So, maybe don't go to the bar with your buddies, because they might be likely to offer you cigarettes. or you might see them smoking and be tempted. So what can you do to reduce the temptations that you know are going to kind of set you off? So you want to, in other words, what you want to do is avoid using self-control. The trick to the trick to meeting your goals is not having to use self-control, because self-control is bound to fail. It's more likely to fail.
Especially in those that have really poor self-control.
Yeah. Actually, you know what? It turns out that those people who have the highest self-control, use it the least. If that makes sense. Yeah. They are actually managing their situation such they don't need to use self-control at all. And it's the people who have a really, really tough time who rely on self-control. So you can think of self-control as the emergency brake.
Yeah.
Okay. You don't want to use your emergency brake. That means you're about to have an accident.
Yeah.
Okay. You want to use your regular brake. And you can think of self-regulation as things that happen well before you're in an emergency. Self-control is when the poutine is right in front of you. It's an emergency now, man. Whereas if I didn't even have the poutine in front of me, I'm in no risk of actually eating it.
I am going to go eat some poutine with bacon after this interview, man, because you keep talking about poutine, dude. Is there a sense of excitement for some when it comes to self-control and temptation? May they be using that for excitement?
What do you mean by that? Excitement in what?
Like people might put themselves in a situation where they're trying to test their self-control for the sort of adventure of it. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I never really considered that. So kind of like you have people who jump out of airplanes. You have someone who's on a diet and they've got, again, the poutine in front of them.
Yeah.
Can they... Yeah, so, adventure sport. I'm not sure. I've never heard of that before. I suppose it's one you could do it.
But especially when it comes to something like sex, wouldn't that be part of the thing? The temptation is part of the trying in order to resist is part of the enjoyment of something that might seem bad to you. Mm-hmm. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's a possibility. So someone who's like really, trying to, you think of people who are like, sex addicts, quote unquote sex addicts. I don't know if it's actually a real thing. But there's people who really like sex more than, there's a variability in the degree to which people like sex. And some people like it more than others. And let's say you're trying to reduce the amount of sex you have. Is it exciting to try to see if you can, I suppose it'd be exciting, but if your goal is to not have sex, having temptation in front of you is gonna lead. You're more likely to fail. I suppose it's exciting, but it depends on what you're after. Are you after the excitement of seeing how much you can stop it, or are you after meeting your goal of having less sex? If it's at the latter, then don't tempt yourself. Again, the biggest predictor of whether you're going to meet your goals or not is whether you're tempted or not. If your goal is to have fun and be excited, then sure, do that. But then realizing you're sacrificing your don't have sex goal for the excitement goal.
For the excitement goal.
Yeah.
I just wonder with those people who have some of those stranger proclivities, like they like to be humiliated and those types of things. They like to feel bad. They like when they fail at things, or at least they're really good in other portions of their life, but they find in something else, they find joy in that. There's also those types that enjoy feeding others as part of that. I'm wondering if self-control has something to do with that.
There's like infinite ways to be human.
Yeah.
So I suppose, but again, what it comes down to is that you can think of we all have multiple goals in our lives. Okay. We are multi-goal organisms, and not all organisms are like this. Some organisms are just like eat and that's it, and they're asexual, reproduce that way. So we have multiple goals, and I suppose the question is, what's your bigger goal? Is the goal to not have sex, not eat the food, or is the goal to kind of punish yourself? It seems like there's some enjoyment you get out of depriving yourself of things. or of putting yourself in dangerous, situations. So I guess the question is, what goal is more salient? If your goal, if at any one point you're, again, kind of live dangerous, humiliate yourself goal is salient, then that could be one way of doing it. But again, you're then sacrificing the other goal. So I think it really depends. You're juggling different goals here, but I suppose it's I suppose people might do that. So I guess you could imagine someone who's trying to quit smoking and they try on purpose to have lots of cigarettes around them, and for the thrill of resisting,
for the thrill of resistance.
Yeah. They might get that thrill, but they might be disappointed to discover that eventually they're going to smoke cigarettes.
Well, and I don't think it would be a very long amount of time either. I think they would lose fairly quickly.
Yeah, that's right. And actually, going back to that example, there was actually a study exactly on this question where, these researchers, I think they were out of Chicago, they asked people whether they could resist, either smokers or ex-smokers or people trying to quit smoking. Could they resist smoking a cigarette if one is in their hand? And a lot of people say yes. Oh, yeah, no problem. I could do it. And then when they have the cigarette in their hand, more often than not, they're smoking the cigarette.
Yeah.
So that kind of goes to your point of people don't really understand how powerful the emotions are in the situation. The pull of the cigarette in this case. So it might be thrilling for some people, but they'll soon discover, it's the thrill doesn't last very long because they're within a few minutes or a few seconds they're smoking.
So let's go way to the other end. How does somebody then do something like be a monk and meditate all day? And is it because those situations are set up that most temptation is removed? Or are they just better at setting a goal where my goal is clarity, my goal is eternal salvation? They're just more focused on that goal. Is that do they have that ability? Is that why they're able to do that type of a life?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question as well. And I think it's more, in my opinion, it'd be more the latter. And this also goes back to your question about religion, right? So with meditation, I think, a lot of Buddhist traditions are actually secularized now. There's not even necessarily deities there or gods there. Although in traditional Buddhist traditions, of course, there are gods, especially Tibetan Buddhist traditions. But nonetheless, you still have a religious community. You have norms. So if you're in a monastery, everyone's waking up at that same time, and everyone's meditating and sitting quietly. So you see other people doing it, so that helps you do it. That would be number one. But I think ultimately, it's the people who are going to do that. It's really important to them that they maybe have there's some goal in mind that's really, really powerful for them. I don't think the goal there is to the thrill of denial. I think the goal there is they think by engaging in this kind of these little denials, they're going to have, greater clarity, more focus, maybe greater appreciation for the connectedness of humanity, or even just the ability to focus on something. I think when they have that goal, it's such a strong, strong goal, and then it's being supported by a community, by standards. Then it's kind of, I don't want to say it's easy to do. It's not easy at all. It's incredibly hard to do. But they can do it. And also, you're right as well. Those temptations aren't there to the same extent, although not necessarily. I mean, with meditation, it's the biggest temptation is thinking, right? Because what you're trying to do when you're meditating is to stop that chatter that's going on in your mind. You're trying to kind of quiet down your mind, and you're actually trying to. I don't want to say you're not trying to think, but you're trying to be present in the moment and follow where you are, and that means not being elsewhere with your mind. And that means kind of noticing when your mind is going offline and bringing it back to the present. And we're so used to doing that with our minds that it becomes difficult to do that. So you have thinking temptations everywhere. So those temptations aren't gone, but there are other temptations that are gone, like maybe some eating temptations, some smoking temptations, some other kinds of temptations you might have. But the biggest one is thinking, and that's there. But nonetheless, I think the main, again, the biggest driver there is they have a goal, a really, really strong goal that they identify with, and they want to bring about. And that maybe to answer one of your earlier questions again with another answer is a good way to improve your self-control is you have to start from the beginning. Set a goal. Mm-hmm. And we know a lot about setting goals. So when you set a goal, that goal has got to be specific. It's got to be concrete. It's got to be challenging, yet not too difficult. Otherwise, you get demotivated. It also has to have a time horizon. Mm-hmm. So it can't just be like, okay, a bad goal would be, I want to lose weight. Yeah. That's like a very fuzzy goal. No, the goal has got to be, I want to lose 7 pounds within, 3 months. And then even further than that, I'm going to restrict my calories to, for example, 1,500 calories a day for 6 out of 7 days a week, or blah, blah, blah. So setting goals, that's how you start. And with meditators, people go on retreats, they've got that really strong goal of like, quieting their mind, maybe enlightenment or something of that nature. Yeah.
Okay, we're getting close on time, so I got 2 quick questions for you. First one is the ability to commit intrinsically tied to self-control?
So the ability to intrinsically commit to what?
Commit to anything. Commit to purchasing a home, commit to a relationship, commit to a job. Is that intrinsically tied to self-control, or is that a separate part of the human mind?
I think the way you've just described commit, I would say it is intrinsically tied. So again, we need goals to engage in self-regulation and self-control. And if we're not really sure about our goal, if we're not committed to our goal, if we don't identify with our goal, well, then it's easy not to do it. So I'm like, yeah, I kind of want to lose weight. Mm-hmm. I'm not really sure. Well, the poutine shows up. You're like, yeah, you know what? I don't really have that goal anymore. Right? So you have to commit to the goal. But now there are different ways of committing to the goal. Okay, so you can commit to a goal for, let's say, autonomous reasons. You can do it for, self-identified reasons, reasons that are like, I'm doing this because I love it. It's coming from me. I want to lose weight because I want to be healthy. Or, a really good way to commit to losing weight is like, I really love healthy food and I want to eat more healthy food and I want to be healthy. One that's less good is, well, my doctor told me I got to do this and I don't really feel like it, but I got to do it. Well, guess what? You might do it for a little bit, but then when push comes to shove, you're like, I didn't really like that goal to begin with. So that would be called an extrinsic goal, a goal that's kind of, you want to do it, but it's coming from outside. Those are going to be more weakly held goals, and you'll find yourself when you're tired, when you're stressed, when you're drunk, less able to do it or less willing to do it. So relating to your goals in an intrinsic way, an autonomous way, is more powerful, more long lasting. But it's hard. It's hard because then it begs the question: how do I turn what I use the terms want to goals and have to goals. Mm-hmm. Have to would be kind of from the outside. A goal that's a have to is harder to maintain. But then the question is, if I've got a have to goal, how do I make it a want to goal, which we know are healthier? And I don't know how to do that. Yeah. So I think we need more research to figure that out.
Perfect. One last question, and I call this read, watch, and listen. What is something you would recommend the people read, something you recommend they watch, and something you recommend they listen to?
And this can be about anything unrelated to what we just talked about?
Anything.
Okay, that's kind of fun. So I'll have to think about this. Okay, so read. I read a book, a very, very powerful book over the summer. It's called Galileo's Middle Finger. It's written by a scholar named Alice Dreger. And it details, it's a political book, and it details how the tale of truth seekers, scientists and scholars who are trying to tell their version of the truth, and how sometimes truth and justice collide, and what happens when those two things collide, and when there are political forces that now want to deny your version of the truth. And it gets into some really, really interesting, controversial topics in science. So that was one of my favorite books that I've read in the past few years. Loved that. What was this? A read,
Watch and listen.
watch, and listen. So watch. Actually, watch and listen, I think, are going to be related. And again, I'm just going in anything here.
Yeah, anything.
I just watched on Saturday a movie, Star is Born. Directed
nice.
by Bradley Cooper, starring Lady Gaga. And I should say I like Bradley Cooper because he was in Hungover, and I thought it was a hilarious movie. But he directed this movie and acted. But I know nothing about Lady Gaga other than something about a meat dress of some sort. I'm not a fan of hers. But I was so incredibly moved by this movie. I mean, I was crying in this movie. And I'm not a crier, typically in movies. And I just was so incredibly moved by the story, but also by the music. So that then brings up, number three, listen.
Yeah.
So Lady Gaga and Bradley Cooper sing this song called "Shallow." It's on the A Star Is Born soundtrack, and I was just listening to it before we started this interview. And again, it's a really incredibly moving song.
It is a great tune.
Yeah, it just makes me. So I'm someone. Apparently, not everyone feels this, but I'm. Music really moves me. And I get goosebumps like routinely when certain songs kind of evoke certain feelings in me, and that song will do it every single time. It just gets me in a deep down emotional place.
Wow. Do you have a desert island album?
A desert island album. I mean, I have a desert island. So that's a first step. Actually, it wouldn't be so much of a desert island. It's an island, and there are no cars on it. It's off the coast of Lombok in Indonesia. It's called Gili Air. It's this beautiful, incredible island. Volcanoes, white sand, incredible island. An album. I have to think about it. I mean, it depends on what phase of my life. Probably in my early 20s, it would have been Nirvana, Nevermind. I was a huge Nirvana fan, and that was when I'll never forget the day that I found out he died. I remember exactly where I was. That was Kurt Cobain killed himself.
Absolutely.
So that was a big one. But
where were you when he died?
And then that was super sad. But I don't listen to Nirvana as much anymore.
Where were you when he died?
I was watching a Montreal Expos home opener in 1994, but I discovered it. I didn't discover it in the game, but that was when it happened, and then I came home and someone told me about it. So that was and then I just spent the next 3 days just listening to his music, reading all I could about Kurt Cobain. I mean, I knew a lot about him already to begin with, but I wouldn't call that one of my favorite albums. I've gone into a reggae kick the past few years, and I love Jamaica. I try to visit there as often as I can. Again, there's so much. I love music. So there's too many. I'll pick one album. Toots and the Maytals got this great album called Funky Kingston, and every single track on that is a winner. And it's upbeat, happy music. It's not really serious. I don't get the shivers listening to that music, but I listen to that stuff. And I just want to dance and have a good time, and it puts me in a good place.
You ever listen to Barrington Levy?
Oh yeah,
yeah,
sure.
I like him a lot.
I love Barrington Levy. He's got Black Roses.
Yeah, Black Roses, one of my favorite tunes.
And Murderers, another great tune. Yeah, I'm a big fan.
Good stuff. All right, well, I will give one more listen recommendation. Your podcast is definitely worth giving a listen to, so I'll leave that on the end so people can check that out. They can get that it's on iTunes. I've got to subscribe to my iTunes, but you can get it on everything else as well.
Yeah, you can get it anywhere. So it's Two Psychologists, 4 Beers. I believe it's something like 4beers.fireside.fm. But you can find on any podcast reader anywhere.
Perfect. Well, Michael, once again, thank you so much for being so generous with your time. It was great to speak to you. So thank you very much once again. And we'll end it there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.